This is the Andres Segovia Show.
Hey everyone, it's Andres, and I have a very unique interview today with a very special guest. He was the counterterrorist chief of operations of the CIA. He is the author of the book Black Ops: The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior. Oftentimes, when we hear about the CIA, we only hear about the negative stuff in the news because, well, that's what drives the headlines. And it's normally because those that made a political career out of things give the institution a bad name. And I know a lot of people have their own emotional perspectives about the CIA, what it is and what it's not. And while I have my own opinions too, I figured why not actually talk to someone that was from that field. But I had an opportunity to meet with this gentleman before I had him on the show, and I knew eventually I would have to. So here is my conversation with the author of Black Ops, Rick Prado. I'd like to welcome onto the Andres Segovia Show, Rick Prado. Rick, it's good to see you and speak with you again, sir. Welcome to the Andres Segovia Show.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
We met at a Warrior Weekend, September 2025, for a charity event. So we happened to meet at a range there because we were there with a couple of the heroes from Benghazi, John Tig Tigan and Dave Boone Benton. And that's where you and I got introduced. And at the time, I didn't know who I was talking to per se, but I just know that Sarah Adams kept telling me, "Have you spoken to Rick yet? Have you spoken to Rick?" It's like, "No, he was at the Long Gun." Like, just go talk to him. He's right there. It's lunch. I will. And that's how you and I got talking, and we rode the shuttle back. We went back to the hotel. But I already knew there's a lot that he has to say. And then you said you have a book, which is Black Ops, by Rick Prado, right over my shoulder here, and I finished reading the book and I'm like, that's who I was talking to. That was my reaction every time I was flipping the pages, sir. So this is a great honor to be speaking with you. And I hope that people start grasping a little bit about who you are and what you do. So just to grasp a little bit, you were at the CIA for how long?
24 years.
Wow. And the things that you've seen, I'll highlight some of the stuff that I read in your book about that. But you were born in Cuba.
Yeah, I was born in Cuba. I was there. I was about 8 years old when the revolution, the communist revolution took over. I saw my first firefight at the age of 7 before they took my town. There was a big firefight right in front of my window. They confiscated my dad's property very quickly. He had a small coffee roasting company. Mm-hmm. And Dad decided, once Bay of Pigs failed, he decided that he was going to get out. We were all going to leave. My mom and dad couldn't get out, so at least not for the first year. So they sent me in a program called Peter Pan with the Catholic Church. And I went straight into an orphanage in Pueblo, Colorado, where I turned 11. So good start.
Yeah, and I think you were was a couple of years, was it a year or two before?
No, it was just short of a year before they were able to come out and pick me up. I mean, kind of thing. So because I was Pueblo, Colorado is a long ways from
I know Miami. It's like I think you were moved from, was it Miami, and then from there over to Pueblo? Yeah.
Yep. We flew from Havana to Miami. I was there about maybe 10 days with the processing. And then I was sent to Pueblo, Colorado.
Yeah. And this was an orphanage, so you were among a lot of other kids that I'm assuming were refugees, right?
Well, yes and no. There was a handful of Cuban kids. There was probably about 6 or 7 of us.
Oh, okay.
The rest were just regular orphans, and and it was you grow up fast when you hit an orphanage. Everybody is you got 2 or 3 different cultures, 2 or 3 different languages. And a lot of pissed off kids because who wants to be an orphan? So you learn to take care of yourself really early on, and how to take care of your enemies and how to take care of your friends. That was a very early lesson. So
yeah, it's for the handful of you that were refugees. How many of them were able to be reunited with their parents?
I don't know because I was one of the lucky ones. There was one kid that before me that went home. But like I said, I was there probably 9 months or 10, and after that, I don't know what happened to the other refugees, but a lot of the kids that came out through that program, and as a matter of fact, it was 14,400 kids that the Catholic Church was able to extricate out of communism, and a lot of those kids never got to see their parents until they were, you know, adults working that they could claim them from Cuba, and their parents came over, kind of stuff. I know several of friends of mine that was what happened with them. Yeah.
Wow, and that's what I wanted to highlight because yeah, you were fortunate enough, blessed to be reunited with your parents and that fast. So you were able to make a new life here, everything new, starting from the ground up. Unfortunately, not in coffee anymore, but it was definitely trying to make a living, and there's just so many things that I saw, at least from you when you were of age, to be able to do your own work. What was it? Was it your father or you that was in carpentry, or both?
My dad. It was my
Is
dad.
that right?
My dad was an incredible handyman. I mean, he was a craftsman. He had a construction company. Eventually, he started mowing lawns in to make ends meet at the beginning there,
Mhm.
loading trucks and mowing lawns. But eventually, he got into the carpentry there. He was already a very, very talented carpenter from before. And he ended up being a construction manager and American dream.
Yeah, and you ended up doing eventually public service. And I'm leapfrogging over a lot of history. I wish I could tell people, but that's what your book is for. So, and it's available on audio too. And for when you entered public service, because you were you worked with the firefighters, and you also did. I think the scuba diving. I think that was more on like on your side, but then you kind of you tell the people. It's your life.
Yeah. No, I joined. Yeah, diving was my passion. I started diving when I was a freshman in high school.
Hmm.
I worked at Arby's, and the manager was a Vietnam vet. He was a Navy frogman, not a SEAL. Then he was a UDT guy. And I've always loved the ocean. I love to swim. So he taught me how to dive. And I literally, when the kids would skip school to go smoke pot, I would skip school to go scuba diving. So that was my passion. But when I first came pararescue, I joined the U.S. Air Force pararescue. Pararescue is part of our special operations family. Green Berets, SEALs, pararescue, combat controllers, Marine Raiders. So I did that for a total of 8 years between active and reserve, and then I was recruited by the CIA in mid 1980. Yeah,
Man, to A's, yeah. Um, you were recruited because they needed someone to speak Spanish. That spoke Spanish.
yeah. What happened was when I went reserve in '94, because I went in '71. When I went in full time reserves, I joined the fire department and rode as a paramedic
Mm.
in Miami during the '70s, which were the drug wars. So I got plenty of hands-on trauma and all that. So the agency was looking for, a guy with paramilitary background. By the way, I was the first pararescueman that ever set foot in CIA. So
Oh.
we're a very small unit, very specialized. And they needed somebody who had paramilitary skills, but that had in-depth. So between my pararescue training, which is extensive, and the 6 years that I did riding rescue in Metro Miami, it attracted me to them. And that was on contract.
Mm.
When what you're referring to is when the Contra program started against the communist regime in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas.
Yeah.
The agency called me and asked me to come back full time to be the guy at their camp.
Yeah, and it was that moment where I was flipping in the book. I'm like, "Eh, you were the one that was training Contra? That's the way I reacted. And do I have that right? You were the one that was training Contra.
Yep, I was there for 3 years. For 3 years, I slept in the jungle hammock Monday through Friday. Used to Tegucigalpa on the weekend, especially after I got married.
Mhm.
My wife, I met her in Miami. Um, but for the first 14 months of that program, I was the only CIA officer allowed in the camps because, as the title of the book goes, it was a black op.
Mm.
Black ops are those operations that the American hand has to be hidden. So I was there as a Honduran major. So that was my cover for the first 14 months. Then they brought in 3 retired Green Beret sergeant majors that helped me with the camps, because we had 10 camps, and it was a lot of training because now we were growing. But for the first 14 months, everything from headspace and timing on a 50 cal to RPG 7s to patrolling to communications, that was me imparting the training on the Contras there. Best job I had in my life, by the way.
But what's that like, to help the audience get into that frame of mind? Because you're basically on your own trying to train people that in some cases you don't know if they're working for the bad guys too, because I'm sure they had their own black ops embedded among them, right?
Oh, of course. I mean, the intelligence game is the Cold War, especially, is alive and well. We knew that they had penetrations from the Sandinistas, but the greater majority of the guys that I worked with they were true believers. You could tell them by their actions, not just by their words. They were very aggressive and successful in the long run. It took over 10 years, but still they were able to force the Sandinistas to stop the war and have free elections, and they actually lost the elections.
Mm.
I used to go a lot to El Salvador for procuring boats and stuff like that for some of my operations. So it was a very healthy time for me.
Yeah, man, there was a moment in your time there though that one of the leaders was assassinated of I think it was Contra, that was assassinated, and there were two lower level or subordinates that ended up kind of doing like their own thing, where they ended up taking like their own private military for their own personal gains and stuff, and you had to bring him into justice pretty much.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, the commander was a good friend of mine. He was one of my favorite commanders. His pseudonym was Suicida,
Mm.
which means suicidal. And he was a tough dude. I mean, he led the charge every time they went out on operations. So he was one of my favorites. He got killed, and the 2 sub commanders, they had like, yeah, they always had 3, 4 sub commanders, but the 2 of them became cuatreros. They started stealing cattle, whoring, drinking in town, and all this kind of stuff. And they committed some heinous stuff against those who, you know, said, "No, this is wrong. You're doing this wrong." And the Honduran service found out about it. We found out about it, and they looked at me and said, "Go, bring him back." So made did it on 2 different days. I brought them both back. They weren't willing, but I convinced them.
Yeah, and uh, for political optics here, though, that was one of the situations that made, because I believe there was at first there was support until it was looked like it was a rogue, like gung ho, like my goodness, I'm losing the phraseology here, but they just looked like there was just loose gunmen that were funding or supporting.
This was a unique incident. It was definitely the only incident of his ilk during my tenure. So it was the exception, not the rule. And we
Mm.
put a pretty short stint to it. Like I said, at gunpoint, I brought them both back separately. They were eventually convicted in a military trial and dealt with accordingly.
Mm.
But that was the exception, not the rule. You're referring to a lot of the media hype out there about things that were going wrong with the Contras after the Bowden Amendment, that they were dealing in drugs and all that. Again, I'm not saying that some singular or small group of people were informing the Sandinistas, others were doing illicit stuff. But that was such a refreshing period for me, because just about every single person that I dealt with had a personal reason for being there. None of these guys talked about, except the former officers or something, but the majority of these men and women, because there were a lot of women in these camps also fighting, um, to them it was all personal. It was like, they burned my church,
Mm.
they beat up my priest, they raped my daughter. It was all real earthy kind of reasons, not no geopolitical interest, no Marx and Lenin. It was basic survival of their culture, their love, and their religion.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that doesn't make the headlines because it's when they try to derail a movement, it's usually through the court of public opinion, and gossip travels, lies travel further than the truth. That's primarily one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because there's some stuff that we're going to touch on that sheds light that I haven't heard anywhere else, and that's what makes your book so important. That for the reason why I'm highlighting it and added it to my recommended reading list, or for those of you on that shop on Amazon, it's on my recommended readings list, because this is the kind of stuff we don't hear about. Because that's not what makes movies sexy or novels sexy. Because I was texting you, I was telling you, hey, where in this moment of you with the CIA are the elaborate car chases, the interesting tools that you guys use, all the gadgetry? There's none of this stuff there. No parkouring. I didn't see any parkouring over rooftops, Rick. What was up with that?
Well, I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for my Aston Martin. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
No, there, as you know, there's a lot of sexy operations in the book, but they're real. They're not the hyped up stuff. I mean, I love James Bond. I love watching their movies, but that's not the way it is. When have you seen James Bond come back and have to write an after action report or even like that? Oh, yeah, that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But no, it is. I wrote the book for two very specific reasons. The first one is because I developed a conscience that a lot of the people that I led were no longer with us. We have, the CIA is a very small organization. Our Directorate of Operations is a small part of that agency, and we have 141 stars on our wall. And a third of those are post 9/11. And being that I was chief of operations of the Counterterrorist Center when 9/11 happened, some of those, or many of those, I had sent into harm's way. So I felt that the need to put a book out that, as you read it, there's a few black eyes I give to people that were, that should have been there kind of stuff, and things that should have been done better. But I wanted the widows of our fallen to be able to go to their kids and show them something that counters the media that's out there about my agency, that's always corrupt, is always backstabbing, that we're always doing things without the president knowing. As a matter of fact, that nothing could be further from the truth. We are the covert tool for the president of the United States. And he or she is the one that, under Title 50 authorities, can sign off. And like what's going on in Venezuela right now, all we could say is yes, sir, and keep going.
Yeah. And that's something that you and I were also discussing on the shuttle on the way back, because I turned to you, and because I used to be like those Americans that thought just the worst of the CIA, just the FBI. I still think the same about the FBI, but not the CIA so much anymore. And that had a lot to do with actually speaking to individuals, because I learned a lot that in life there will always be bad apples, but when it comes to organizations that can be politicized, usually it's those that are career politicians that make things political. But the people that are working there, like, how come I don't hear much about these heroes that sacrificed, they gave it all while they were out there. We don't hear that. We don't hear the stories about all those stars that are up on the CIA wall. If it wasn't for stories like Benghazi in the film 13 Hours, I don't think people would have understood that those stars are dedicated to the fallen, because there's one for Ronan Bubb, for those that have seen 13 Hours. Secret Soldiers of Benghazi. And that brought to light to me is like, there are stories for these stars that we don't know about. And all we ever hear about are those that make these political decisions at the higher ups. And I think that's unfair. This is why I'm really grateful you wrote that book, and for why I wanted to take some time to also highlight some moments of your life. Because you came from Cuba. You weren't born here, but this country gave your family an opportunity to start over again, away from the communist takeover that took everything from you guys. What made you want to serve in public service and eventually agree to the CIA's recruitment?
Well, let's start with my father. When my father came to the United States, I don't think he'd been here 6 months when he turned over to my mom and says, "We're not leaving. Even if Castro goes down, we're not leaving. This is the country that I want to bring I'm an only son, an only child, our child on." So that was inculcated. My dad, we became residents the day that we could become residents. We became citizens the day that we could become citizens. My dad never missed an opportunity to vote. So in my house, the value of God, country, and family were very prominent and very well displayed by example. So I always had this, I developed. It was actually a funny incident. There was it was my first year at Miami-Dade Junior College, and I didn't know anybody there because all my friends that I hung out with in high school were not the guys that were going to be going to college, and it was a rough crowd. And the hippies posted that they were going to take down the flag the next day and burn it, and they were called to show up for the demonstration of anti-war Vietnam War. And I said to myself, they're not going to take the American flag down. So, but I didn't know anybody, so I had to call some of my homies from high school, and it was 5 of us, about 15 of them, and let's just say it wasn't a fair fight, not for them anyway. But the reason I tell the story, first because it's got a funny element to it, but the real reason is that after that fight, because I had been in, I was in little gangs and all that other stuff, nothing like the gangs that are now, but there still was pretty rough. There's a lot of fighting. And when after that incident, as soon as I looked up, there was a beautiful blue sky and the American flag was waving.
Wow.
And it was the eureka moment for me because for the first time, I was proud of doing violence. I had a reason to do violence. And 6 months later, I signed up and I joined Pararescue, which, like I said, is the special forces for the Air Force.
Wow. Yeah. And you do mention that in your book too. Just hearing it from you, with the emotion and stuff is just it really brings it home because that it speaks more about someone being appreciative of being in this country versus someone that was born and raised here that is doing that very thing. They've been burning flags and supporting the very system that drove you and your family out, which is none of it makes any sense. And it never will. But I think that's the contrast that people need to understand. It's a very different mindset, a different state of being. And wow, that's thank you for sharing that. Now, before I move on to the other thing, I do have to ask you if this kind of goes back to your time with Contra, because this is you were a diver in scuba and training and all that. You trained what were called the Barracudas, right? But there's a moment where I think you guys had to train in the dark, or was that for the night missions, right?
Mm-hmm.
My kids are wondering this because during one of those swims, you encountered a force of nature, and I needed to ask you about that because you swam into a Portuguese man of war, and you said it stung you in the face.
Yeah, what happened was in the Mosquito, these Mosquito Indians, 6 or 7 of them were lobster divers. And they saw my scuba badge because I was always in military uniform, but I wore some of my bling. And they asked me if I was a diver, and that got the conversation going. And eventually I came up with the idea of blowing up Puerto Cabezas using my diver. So I took these guys, I put them through selection. 4 of them made it, the other 3 washed out. And they became my Barracuda team. So what happened was we had an 80-pound plume charge of 80 pounds of C4.
Wow.
And in order to swim that into the port, because you can't just come up in a boat, we had to make sure that it was stable and they hadn't been exposed to the mosquitoes yet. Because again, operational security, so I had to do the test swimming for the device, and you need to add more buoyancy here because it's got to be of neutral buoyancy. You don't want it floating up or you don't want it sinking down.
Yeah.
And on the way back, I got a man of war right stuck between my mask and my
Oh my
mouthpiece,
goodness.
and it was like glue there. And I looked like a grouper the next day. My lips were all swollen and stuff. But lo and behold, it took us 3 months of training and preparation, but we were able to. And I was in the water with them when we first launched them, and they took out Puerto Cabezas Poor. And the importance of that is Puerto Cabezas at the time was the belly button to Cuba to receive Soviet Union assistance via Cuba. that's where all the military stuff was coming into, was the political bases.
One thing that a lot of us take for granted are the details. Because yeah, you were said you were planning for this mission, this how to transport this, swim right. You just didn't count on a Portuguese man of war to get on the way back and things like that. But I bring that little humor out, especially because I was reading that shortly after showing my kids a nature documentary about the Portuguese man of war, and they were just so fascinated by it. I'm like, hey, the guy I met ran into it, or swam right into it. So that's why I highlighted. But it was also part of, it's an entire chapter that you devoted to the Barracudas. You were eventually being tasked to go to El Salvador, which would have personally, because I'm Salvadorian. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, but my parents were born and raised in El Salvador, and it was, I don't know if it was the Honduran War, and then the Civil War, where it forced some of my family to end up leaving. It wasn't that many, just very few. But my parents ended up meeting in Los Angeles. So they married here, and I came along not too long after. And in reading that, it's like, oh, were you going to be involved there? But you were actually detoured away from El Salvador. I think you ended up in the Philippines.
No, actually, yeah, I was supposed to go to El Salvador to help the programs there. And at the last minute, the division chief called me in and says, the chief of station in San Jose, Costa Rica, wants you to be his program manager for the southern front of the Contra program.
Oh, okay.
Big difference, where in Honduras I had an AR-15, Browning, 2 grenades, and a knife. Here I am in coat and tie, still carrying a gun.
Mm-hmm.
But we were doing it very clandestine, because unlike the Hondurans, who were extremely helpful, the Costa Ricans were actually trying to compromise us, because they didn't want the ire of the Sandinistas to be focused on them.
Oh,
so yeah, the last minute, it was great for the family, because obviously my family got to live in Costa Rica versus Salvador, which happened to be the time that the earthquake happened and all that other stuff. But for me, it was a tough job, because it was a hell of a transition from the paramilitary side of the stuff that I was really comfortable with, to now working out of an embassy and mini French resistance kind of existence in Costa Rica as they try to track us down.
Yeah. Okay. And it was after that you ended up in the Philippines?
I had after Costa Rica, I went to another South American country, which I was not allowed to
disclose,
to mention by name, but that was my first counterterrorism job, and it was working primarily against a Maoist insurgency in South America. Go figure. Yeah. And after that, I went to the Philippines. Yeah, Philippines was let's see. 90 through 92. I was in the South American country. I was there from 88 to 88 to 90.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because it was. I think we use the book says Shangri-La. I think that was the fictitious name for what you couldn't disclose. Because I wanted to make sure I'm not misremembering. Because it was in the Philippines where 2 things happened. One, there was a volcano eruption, but that came after your first confrontation. Where I'm glad you highlighted a 3-man assassin team that were out taking out targets. That was Philippines, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the New People's Army, the NPA, had a team of assassins called the Sparrows. The guys were extremely efficient. It was the NPA that killed Nick Rowe. Colonel Nick Rowe was our military attaché at our embassy. He got killed about 8 months before I got there, I think it was. And they had killed numerous Americans up at Clark Air Force Base and at Subic. And their modus operandi was very, very ingenious. And as a matter of fact, you can Google, NPA, what I call them?
Sparrows.
Sparrows. Yeah, Sparrows. And they have a YouTube video of how they work. But the bottom line is they carry a 1911 45 caliber pistol in their crotch, no holster. The grip is taped down, and they hold it with their left hand in their pocket. So all they do is they push up the pistol, come up, shoot you, put it away, and walk off. And everybody would say, "Where did the shot came from?" They were deadly. So we were coming out of, we were working there with the Filipino Green Berets or Special Forces. And we had spent all week there. And one of the nights we went to dinner and coming out of the restaurant, it was six of us. And two Filipino captains, I'm sorry, officers, two of our agency techs, and me and my colleague, Davis. And we were the last two to come out. I was the last one to come out. And Davis was just before me. And as soon as we walked out of the restaurant, the other four guys, they were still thinking about the dancing girls and drinking their beer. I immediately saw three guys at about 20 yards from me that were talking. They were like this, and all of a sudden they get three abreast. They start walking towards us. The two on the outside have the left hand on their pocket. The one in the middle is making direct eye contact with me, and unbeknownst to me, Davis had also seen it. We had tunnel vision during those kind of exciting moments. It does happen. And so what happened was I drew my weapon first. So when they saw the weapon, they weren't even surprised. It was like, I mean, if you're a civilian just walking and somebody all of a sudden puts out a big shiny 45 caliber pistol pointed to you, and by now you're like at maybe 15 yards, there's some kind of reactions. These guys just looked at me and just went like, okay, we'll get you next time kind of look. So my buddy Davis had also noticed, he had also drawn his weapon. But my other four colleagues were absolutely, unaware of what was going on. So,
Wow.
but I would tell you, I've used this as a lesson because everybody talks about fast draw, and I'm into guns, and I'm, like I said, that's my life. But awareness beats a fast draw every single time. If I would have not noticed these guys until after their weapons were out, I wouldn't be talking to you. They would have probably killed all of us. So it wasn't just us that prevented it. It was, they saved the rest of our crew. So yeah, awareness, whether you're a civilian or where you're in any kind of law enforcement or military or whatever, it's the kind of thing that can save your life.
Yeah. Well, amen to that. Yeah. That's what I wanted to make sure I highlighted that for this conversation, because that was an intense moment that you described there in the book, and I didn't even realize, because we get as citizens that are not, especially those that are not into history and things like that, don't realize just how much this movement of communism was taking over the world. We think about the Americas because, well, I was born and raised here, and sometimes we hear it firsthand from our families. Or we think back to the Iron Curtain after the Soviet Union refused to leave after taking Eastern Europe. But we forget Mao's China. There, that was another competing thing. They wanted that Red Army to walk all around the world, and they were moving just absolutely everywhere. Hence our involvement in Korea and eventually Vietnam. And we forget about these things. That's why when I was reading, you went to the Philippines. Why were you in the Philippines? And then it's just like, oh my goodness, even there was really no safe place. And is or was the CIA our for the United States, was that our only defense? Because it almost seems like that was our only way to try to stop this flow of communism.
Well, there's the agency, the operational arm of the agency, especially the paramilitary side, we're referred to as the third option. The first option is diplomacy. When that fails, the second option could be military, but that's not always what we want. We're the third option, and that is our job, to go in early, prepare the locals, kind of like the Green Berets do with their special forces guys. That's where we all grew up from, the same OSS. That's the root of intelligence and paramilitary operations. But I mean that's what we do. We collect intelligence, and we do covert action programs like the ones that are in the book. And this was a program, very robust program, helping the Filipinos fight the Abu Sayyaf terrorists, which were the Muslim radicals in Mindanao, which is in the south, and then the rest of the island, which was a New People's Army, that we had a lot of dealings with too. So,
Wow. I guess that's why it just, they eventually woke up and realized that, hey, you know what? as communists, we can just buy our way into these countries instead of firing guns. So that's the Belt and Road Initiative being one of them. It just feels like, ugh, that's one thing. But we have to get too sidetracked on that. The That pretty much was to the early '90s, and then where was the transition where were you highly involved? I don't recall this part because I've been doing a lot of research on this and I want to keep my things straight. In addressing the Islamic terror threat, particularly through Osama bin Laden, were you brought in early on in that, or was that like
Yep,
a little later?
very, very much. As a matter of fact, Mike Scheuer, which was an analyst, and I, who was a senior operations officer, I had just turned GS-15, which is our colonel rank kind of thing for reference sake. And I got called in and by the chief of operations at the counterterror center. Says we want to start a task force, and we want you to be the deputy of the task force. Mike Scheuer, the analyst, was going to be the chief, and I was the deputy chief and the senior ops officer. And he said, I asked him, I said, so who are we going after? He said, Osama bin Laden. And I said, who? He says, exactly. So in January of 1996, we started the Bin Laden Task Force. Now, here's the irony, and this is where a lot of people get frustrated and end up blaming the agency for some reasons, but they don't understand that the agency cannot do anything that the White House doesn't tell you to do. Okay. So in 1997, we had bin Laden bracketed in Khartoum. We had him under constant surveillance. We had satellite coverage of him. He was living the life because Sudan, Khartoum, was a hotel for terrorists. You paid, they protected you. They felt immune to any activity there that would be negative to them. So we kept putting together plans for taking out bin Laden back then. And when I say taking out or neutralizing, I don't mean just shooting him in the head, although that was an option that we proposed, but even just capturing, bringing him back for interrogations, because we knew from our sources, we knew from the overhead of camps that he was that was building terrorist training camps, from the intelligence from other sister services that they were getting, how big he was becoming. This is before even the Al-Qaeda word came out to notice. But my point is, in 1997, we knew where he was. We knew what he was doing. And a 12-man team from any special unit in the military, of our military, could have gone in there and got his ass out or taken him down. Imagine the history if we would have been allowed in 1997 or 1998 to take out Osama bin Laden. The twin embassy bombing in Africa wouldn't have happened. The attack on the Cole that killed 17 sailors never would have happened. And most likely 9/11 would have been at least delayed or never happened. So this is where the politics, you cannot run special operations through a political optic. I always say this. This is my soapbox. Yeah. Because I lived it. I lived it in the agency several times. But this is where people misconstrue, and they assume that if you have, if you don't like Marines, they're all bad. Or if you don't like Navy SEALs or Navy, they're all bad. And no organization is like that. It's on the contrary. Like you said earlier, everybody has some bad eggs in them. But the agency was a very honorable profession for me. And the colleagues that I enjoyed for those 24 years were brave men and women that did things that people will never know. My book was fully cleared by the agency. That's why there's stuff that's blacked out.
Yeah.
Some of the sexier, and so some of the more kinetic stuff is blacked out. And we'll talk about that. Although I did get to brief the Vice President of the United States on the program, the details that allow me to say it. But you don't go into a place like the CIA to become famous or to become rich. Okay, I was a GS-10, which is a first lieutenant. I'm a second lieutenant when I was in Honduras, and the other one is for popularity. If you walk into a military compound, who's got what on their chest. They have their combat infantry badges, they have their jump wings, they have this, they have their rank. None of that exists in the agency. My badge as a GS-10 was exactly the same except for the photo when I became a senior officer in 1998. Blue badge with a photo with a number underneath. So it is not the place that you go to become popular or to make the news as or to make big money, because like I said, we're federal, we're just federal employees, for lack of better word.
Yeah, and there's a there's a lot there. But yeah, and I totally agree with you. There'll always be those that try to make a political career out of things, and we know who those people are. They're on the news all the time, and they try to use their credentials to try to boost their what they're saying, even though it's a lie, as if it's authoritative, which in a sense it is because of who they are and what position they have. But it doesn't mean it doesn't absolve them from lying, such as all those intel officials that wrote signed a letter saying that, oh yeah, that the Hunter Biden laptop is a lie. Like, and some of them like, well, you guys lied on the letters. Like, yeah, I know, but if it meant to stop Trump, like what? So those are the ones that give people like you a bad name, because even though they're few, they're louder, and we don't hear from people like you. And again, why this book is important. And I did want to stay a little bit on this task force to get Osama bin Laden. I think it's more relevant than ever because we're kind of in this midst of the the Al Qaeda 2.0 plot against the homeland that Sarah Adams and David Benton have been shouting from the rooftops, but some people don't take it seriously because of history of what's happened, where agencies weren't talking to each other, and that's the excuse for the Department of Homeland Security and whatever. Could be, but that moment in '97, I am aware of it. It's just I want to make sure that this is probably where I'm connecting it, because Sandy Berger, who was the national security advisor, I believe, of Bill Clinton, in the early 2000s, went into the archives to pull out documents and put them into his pants, which was called a case of sloppiness. It's really hard to find articles about that nowadays, by the way. I've been Googling like crazy and using other search engines like, wow, they're trying to erase history here. Because if I recall, those were connected to that very event because it was part of the investigation into why 9/11 happened. So I don't know, you might have some insight into that, but it was supposed to be connected to the moment where um, Sandy Berger was basically the one that kind of stonewalled any action against Osama bin Laden because they couldn't get a hold of the vice president of the president, and he didn't take any action on it.
Well, this was a long drawn out process. You figure we started the task force in 1996, but Laden struck big time in 2001. Although the embassy bombings in Africa a few years before was also a game changer. 9/11 hit us in the homeland, so that caused the people to wake up. But yeah, you have Bill Clinton, the president at the time, refused to sign a lethal finding because he kept saying that there wasn't enough proof that he was a bad guy. And again, we had compiled dozens, if not 100 files on bin Laden in the first year and a half of the task force, working worldwide. I never stopped going to different countries, trying to get information on him from the local services and working it. But yeah, that was the trajectory of letting it fester for so many years and gain power. There was also several other things that we did wrong. There's a lot of reporting on the fact that when the Marine the Army incident, Black Hawk Down, and all that, that bin Laden said when we withdrew, instead of staying there and kicking the crap out of them, which we could have, when we withdrew from that, bin Laden said, "You see, all you have to do is bloody their nose.
Mm.
They will run away." And that empowered a lot of these terrorist groups to follow suit, try to, bleed us somewhere that would make us withdrawn. Well, I think those days are now gone again. So,
Yeah, I agree, because it wasn't like the fiasco of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Look how if seemingly unstable the world became because we show complete lack of incompetence and weakness, especially after devoting with 20 years there, and now we have relations with the enemy government who is shielding Al Qaeda and we're relying on them as sources to help track down terrorists. None of that makes any sense. And as we record this, it's we're in the midst of a government shutdown, and depending on which report you're looking at, it looks like we're still funding the Taliban while we're shut down, but our troops are it's being threatened that they're not going to get paid. It's it's like a whole Twilight Zone. It's the best way I could describe it.
Yeah, well, that's politics for you, man. That is politics.
Yeah.
Very far removed from reality or morality in some cases.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that's why I've been sticking a lot more to uh, seeing and looking at what led to 9/11 and how we're kind of in the same position where we're ignoring all the signs, but it's because a lot of people blamed, like you mentioned, the agency and the politics of it, like, oh, you guys did nothing about it and let it happen, and World Trade Center 7 and all this. They'll always point to something that will feed the frenzy, and it seems that more today are kind of running away with that narrative without much pushback. And even if there were people like you to push back against that narrative, they still won't take you at face value because, oh no, you're part of the problem because you're CIA. And it's like that confounds me, because there's also a documentary that just recently came out called "The U.S. is Cold," which is exclusively, I believe, on the Daily Wire, and it's really good. And it shows you just how much led up to that, and once again, there was no communication in the case of the USS Cole to let them know about those whereabouts and that kind of danger. Maybe it could have been different. Maybe we didn't have to lose all those soldiers. But even towards the very end, there was those moments, and we don't get that. And it just human error leads to death and destruction. And what we're seeing now is that we have more intel to warn us, and are literally, like Sarah and Boone say, there's no one coming to save you. Scott Mann, rooftop operator, I believe his name is, also published that book about the Al Qaeda plot against the homeland. And it's like these are resources for you. Don't rely on your government. Whereas before it's like the government not coming to help you. It's like, well, they're telling you right now, no, they're not coming to help you. Don't rely on them. You're the first responder. And some people are like, why are we taking this seriously? It's you guys. If you guys know so much, why don't you stop it? Like, it's like you can't win in this point with how much damage this propaganda war has caused to the American psyche. And it is frustrating for me as someone trying to get out, cut through the noise, because if everybody's shouting, nobody's listening. But it's like, I wish more people can listen to individuals like you, like Sarah and Boone and others, instead of trying to dox where they live, forcing them to move and things like that. Like, come on. And then what happens when the enemy moves? It's like, when they strike, what then? You're just gonna blame them for not doing anything? It's like they've been doing everything that they can. And like you said, if without the president say so, the CIA can't technically take any action, despite what people are gonna. I'm gonna get a lot of crap for this. I know. I know a lot of people think about the JFK stuff and all that. Like, I'm sorry, I just haven't got to the point where I buy it all, because I just don't. And I told you when we were on the shuttles, like, I don't fear the CIA as I used to. In fact, if their hand is in everything, they kind of suck at it now. I believe those were I'm paraphrasing what I told you, because with the clandestine things that they did during the Cold War early on, that stuff of legends. That's why people still live off that. But today, if we're seeing that if their hands in everything, and they must really suck at covert operations, because they're just out in the daylight. So if everything's the CIA, then nothing is. So that's where I come to, where it's like discernment is needed, and that's why I wish more people can learn, and they can by picking up your book, which I'll be leaving links to. But there is something too that your colleagues too need their own security. I read when I picked up your book. I saw some reviews on Amazon and on Goodreads. They're like, oh, what are the critics saying? And someone was saying like, oh, I didn't get the same impression, but some people was like, I think this author is too conceited. He thinks too highly of himself. And I'm like, that's not the impression I got, because I met the guy. And then as I'm reading, and you're talking about the shots that you take, I'm like, I was at the gun range with you, so I know. For a while there at the Benghazi Warrior Weekend, you were the best shot until Tig took the title from you. So Although that's up for contention. We don't know if Tig rigged it, but um,
No,
no, he's an awesome
I
shot.
know my limits. I know.
But even at your age, to be able to to still keep training and keeping up, it's like no, it this guy, what you're reading is who he from. That's the impression that I got. That's who he is, and you're to me you're a humble guy too. But you take pride in what you do and who you are, and you have every reason for it. Um, but you guys also need your own security, which is why there's exists like we mentioned at the beginning of this before we start recording, GRS, that they serve as security um, for CIA. I don't know would it be, like case operators. How would you describe it?
Case officers or ops officers are our title. We're not agents. That's the wrong title. FBI are agents. We're
Mm,
not agents. Agents are our sources. But yeah, GRS is a protective paramilitary like security like entity made up mostly of contractors, but they do have staff leadership and management. They come under the Office of Security. I'm a big fan of them. I'm very grateful because I know several times where they have actually saved American lives. As we were talking offline earlier, I did 8 years with Blackwater. I was one of their vice presidents for special government programs, which was the same stuff that I've done all my life. They're just doing it more now.
mm.
Um, but absolutely, at the end of the day, if we don't act on the things, the intelligence that we're getting, and this is where Sarah's point with Boone is something worth listening to. They do have a very strong case. But remember one thing: the CIA cannot operate inside the United States. That's not our turf.
Fascinating.
That's the FBI. That's DEA. That's alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That's Homeland Security. Our operation are strictly outside of the United States continental. We cannot operate in the states. Mhm.
Wow, I think you mentioned that in your book, but I just completely glossed over that. It that's something that we as Americans don't hear because, well, Langley, that's what we think. But, huh? Well, I wonder what the comment section is going to say about all that. But,
It is the truth. I mean, obviously, look, the people what people don't understand is that when you lie about these things or when you divert the truth, you're undermining the credibility of the country, not just the organizations. Okay, everybody blames CIA for the failure of Bay of Pigs. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Mhm.
I was in the agency when I came out of Honduras and Nicaragua jungles, and I went back to headquarters, and I was going through school and everything else. There were still paramilitary officers because that was the first 10 years of my life was on the special forces side of the CIA, who had been the guys who had put together the original concept for the Bay of Pigs, which was in an area called Cienfuegos in the middle of the country, deep ocean port with plenty of beaches to land the people in. Had the main highway, the main railroad that they could be cut, and they had the Escambray Mountains to the east, where that could provide haven anytime there were major attacks. They could, move into the mountains and then come back to town. Politically, that was systematically changed to where by the time the Bay of Pigs, we pulled the trigger on the Bay of Pigs, it was at the Bay of Pigs, which is a swamp. It is extremely mangrove. I've been there. I used to go fishing with my dad there.
Mm.
And the air support that was supposed to be given wasn't given. There are agency guys who quit after that, resigned because of what they felt was a government betrayal. But the point is, that was a presidential decision. Just like Jimmy Carter with the Iran issue,
Mm.
our special operations forces and the agency kept telling him, you got to do this now. You got to do this now. He kept procrastinating and procrastinating. And by the time they tried to do that rescue, it was the wrong time of the year. The haboobs, those sandstorms were endemic at the time. It is, like I said, you cannot run special ops through a political optic. Just you'll fail every time.
Yeah, and we've seen it happen over and over again. Um, I just noticed the time. I don't know how much time you have left, but if you're okay, we can go a few more minutes. Yeah. Okay, because I did want to squeeze in because it was mentioned. We did mention a little bit about the GRS, but Blackwater, you did mention, yeah, your time there. I didn't know that you actually turned down the first job offer though. It was your wife's kind of nudge to get you to go, right?
Yeah, I had spent when I was chief of ops during 9/11, a year later, I gave up that job and I literally ended my career on the street. I went from managing 500 folks in the counterterrorist center to running a 12-person team of which I was part of. And we were chasing bad guys all over the place, trying to get patterns of life on them, targeting them, and so on and so on and so on. So it was, I was burned out. I was
Mm.
literally burned out. And I had become friends with Eric Prince, with the owner of Blackwater, because as chief of ops, he was providing security for our folks in Kabul and subsequently in Iraq, but I was gone by that time.
Mm.
And he pitched me the first time, and I was just burned out. I needed a break. But about 4 or 5 months later, yeah, I was biting at the bit, and we were at a function, and Eric was there, and my wife, who's usually a very shy person, grabbed him by the arm and says, "Please give him a job because he's driving me nuts." And so the rest is history. I did 8 years with them total. So
So just for people to understand, your family was with you during your time in the CIA, in the thick of it, threats of life for who knows how long. But it was 4 or 5 months after the agency that made your wife say, "Please give him something to do. He's driving me crazy." That's what she couldn't take.
sure, well,
I'm teasing,
it's
but
the woman thing, and I understand.
yeah,
She was actually trying to take care of me because
I
she's
know.
a believer.
Yeah,
She's also Cuban, so she knew that, and she knew my colleagues. She knew the quality of people that I work with. So for her, it was like, look, I get it. This is how you're wired, and this is what's going to make you float.
yeah,
But without a doubt, I had we did a lot of good work for the U.S. government, especially for the special side of the military out of Blackwater in the years that we were there, and I am as proud of that as I am of my agency service.
yeah. And I do believe that history was going to absolve Blackwater of many of the, again, the court of public opinion saying all the crap that they did, and for Eric Prince and all. That's what I've come to learn, which I'll have to tell you some other time. But one thing's for sure. I just finished reading Dan Laguna's book. You have to live hard, and it's that you highlight that as one of the moments because Dan Laguna's Blackwater Little Birds were the ones on site when a Polish ambassador was ambushed in, I think it was a quiet neighborhood in Iraq, right? Was that the Green Zone?
No, it was outside the green
I was at
zone.
the Green Zone.
Yeah, the Polish ambassador had his own security detail. Blackwater had nothing to do with that detail. We were strictly working for the Department of State, and of course, we had our agency component embedded into that. And what happened was the ambassador came under attack. They killed several of his men of his protection detail, and they Blue Force Tracker. We're in trouble. We're here, and there was a Blackwater unit that had absolutely no legal or responsibility, all moral, and they responded. They killed the bad guys. They saved the ambassador. As a matter of fact, they were presented with Polish medals and all this other stuff for this kind of stuff. That with what they did, and the bottom line is, no U.S. citizen from State Department or the agency was killed under Blackwater protection.
Yeah,
Not one.
yeah,
Now we have 43 Blackwater men who gave their lives during those conflicts. 43 that died protecting our embassies, our agencies, because DEA was there, everybody was there. The military. Uh, that is a shocking kind of statistic.
yeah. It is, and that speaks to the success story of that, and having to work within. Because I read Eric's book, Civilian Warriors, which I recommend people to get to give an idea of just how much government wanted them to do, but the ridiculous parameters in which to do it. And that kind of laying down the groundwork, as I understood it, to kind of throw them under the bus when the time came when the war wasn't that popular anymore and they needed a villain, and which is unfortunately what happened with Blackwater and the Nasir Square Massacre. Folks, read Raven 23, a recent book that came out by Gina Keating, I think her name is, that tells you how that case was just a bunch of bunkus. And I hope that those men can piece their lives together thereafter, after all this, and Trump's pardon was able to absolve them of much pain. But yeah, I'm glad we spent some time with that, because that moment right there of Blackwater responding and having no responsibility to it, it's very much so what the GRS did in Benghazi when they had literally nothing to do with the special missions compound, but because in some cases they knew some of them, they even told them, "Hey, call us when you need us." They were held back. That's the big deal about this. The biggest political football that makes this is that they were held back for 20 minutes, stand out order or not. They were held back, but they went anyway. And the rest is history. These guys are legends in my book, and history books, at least in my house and the generations thereafter, will know these men by name and will always honor and respect the memory of the fallen, of what happened in Benghazi. And everyone else will make politics out of it, but that be damned. But that's the mindset. And there were at least two of those guys I know, Tonto and Boone, were Blackwater before that. So there's lineage that connects all this, but it's that kind of mentality. And when I asked all of these guys, because I've been able to connect with some of them, call some of them my friends, I said, "Why did you guys do it?" And all the same response individually: Americans were in trouble. That's it. And it's an awesome trait that they have that I wish we could find among more Americans today. I hope that's not lost on many. And I thank you, Rick. We're going to leave it here for the audience. Don't hang up. I have some questions for you after we wrap. But I this airs on Veterans Day, because I never thought I'd be having someone from the CIA and having to tell them, "Thank you for your service," because you guys do a thankless job and you get thrown shade at you all the time. And you guys are quite literally, because of your trade, are not allowed to defend yourselves. And the only ones that can speak are those that have the political fronts, and they don't normally do a good job to defend you guys. So I wish people can ignore a lot of the noise, talk to people like you, pick up your book, and get to know that, hey, there are humans behind this. And who knows, there might be some people that they have in their lives that do work for the CIA, but they can't tell them, because that's just the trade of things. Imagine having to live that life. That's really hard to literally live two lives that way, and seeing that, hey, there could be heroes and you don't know it, and they will never be celebrated, but the ones that take the credit probably never even had a hand in it. They might have even worked against it, but they'll take the credit for it. So, Rick,
That
to
is,
you and those like you, thank you so much for your service, because our country owes you a debt of gratitude.
thank you very much, Andres. That means a lot to me and to mine. So thank you.
Yeah, and you could give these to me offline, but if the links to where people can follow you on social media, if you're curious to follow you.
Yeah, www.rickprado.com. That's my website. That has a synopsis of my life, parts of the book, a couple of sexy photos, and then it has buttons where you could get it Amazon, Warwick's, Barnes and Noble, or whatever. So
Yeah. All right. And I'll be leaving links to that and some of the socials. I know you're on Facebook. I follow you on Instagram. I don't know if you're on X, but if you are, just send me those links and I'll put them in the show notes. Accompany this episode at theandresegovia.com. Rick Prado, this has been a great pleasure. Don't hang out here, but this has been a great pleasure to talk to you, sir. And who knows, you ever up for it? I can pick your brain some more in a future conversation.
sounds like a plan. Thank you. Thank you for having me.